thank you this morning for just a great place in the local church. We recognize your presence here among us. Lord, you sing among us in Hebrews 2:12. And you walk among your candlestands in Revelations 2:1. This morning, maybe just take a moment to recognize your presence. That your Holy Spirit lives inside of each one of us. We thank you for the praise and the worship. Thank you for the singing. We thank you for giving and the offering. We thank you for the testimonies of your work in Mount Hood, Lord. 40 people from Hindu backgrounds have come to the Lord. Amazing. We thank you for the services that will go on this evening. And in all the work we do and all the ministry, help us to remember that it's about you. A personal relationship and a moment by moment with you, Jesus. We pray the fire would always be burning in our hearts when we hear the word. This morning, give us ears to hear where your Holy Spirit may help us to understand today. Please give us understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we may be seated. So this morning we're going to continue our series on marriage, and we've come to a topic, if we can put it up on the screen if you have that ready. We're going to be talking about the subject of handling disagreements and conflicts in marriage. And of course the corollary of that is learning to forgive each other and drawing to intimacy. Basically our premise is that conflict in itself is sometimes inevitable. You will have disagreements, you will have conflicts in marriage, but your conflicts can be a doorway to greater intimacy. It can either isolate you or it can draw you closer. It depends on how you would. Somebody said marriage can be a duel or it can be a duet. And you have to figure out in your own heart how you will handle communication in your marriage. And so one of the things we'll be talking about today is how to handle disagreements. If you had to ask any married couple here today, you had to ask them, have you had disagreements? Have you had conflicts? If they're honest, they will all say, yes, of course we have conflicts. Billy Graham was once asked, his wife was asked, Ruth Graham, Billy Graham, famous evangelist, was asked, and you know the story. They said, have you ever had a conflict with your husband? She said, many, many times. She said, have you ever considered divorce? She smiled. She said, no, but I once considered murder. James Dobson and Shirley Dobson said there were many times they didn't talk to each other, and they're marriage counselors. For 3 days, didn't talk to each other. They said, we counsel people all the time. He says, we learned a lot through it. So if you have had disagreements in your marriage or problems, it does not necessarily mean that's a bad marriage. It just depends on how you learn to communicate with skills. And for young people not yet married, listen carefully, because this will help you a little bit. Believe me, the Holy Spirit will bring this back to you someday. And I just was thinking about this. Think about this. How about last week's bulletin, Pastor Shallow's little thoughts about Adam and Eve in the garden? Do you remember that? That was good. And I was thinking about that, disagreements started way back in the Garden of Eden. Now, I just kind of added to that a little bit, and this is my little thought, okay? Imagine Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and think of a conversation like this. They come out of the Garden of Eden, and Eve is very upset with Adam. She says, why? Why did you eat the forbidden fruit? And Adam looks at her and says, what are you talking about? You were the one who ate the fruit, and you should not have eaten the papaya. And Adam says, so it's my fault now. I like the way you're putting the blame on me. It was you. You're the one who ate the fruit. And Eve says, yeah, but you're supposed to be the leader, right? God told you about not eating the fruit. I didn't even know about it in the beginning. You should have taught me about it. If you had told me properly, I trust you in all your decisions. Yeah, right. Now I'm the bad guy. You're blaming me for the mess that's happened here. It's just like you. Yeah, by the way, you're my helper, aren't you? You're supposed to not lead me to temptation. Yeah, but God gave you a brain too, didn't He? Why didn't you start using it? Emerson. I like that. Remember that? It's like women. And Adam goes away. And he says to Eve, he says, I'm going to work in the garden, and I tell you what, we're not going to talk anymore until you say I'm sorry. If you want to find me, I'm cultivating the ground over there. And I'm not going to talk, we're not going to have any conversation for many days until you apologize. And Eve says, parting shot, she says, really? There'll be a very snowy day in the Garden of Eden when I apologize. By the way, why did you find another tree to sleep under? Don't come home, just find another tree. Now, I don't know how the conversation went in the Garden of Eden. But if it remotely went like that, I can tell you something that happened very quickly after Genesis chapter 3 when this fight happened. Something that tells me that something must have happened, because in Genesis chapter 4 verse 1 we hear something very interesting. It says, and Adam knew his wife Eve, or had relations with his wife Eve, and they bore a child called Cain. Now somewhere between, they became lovey-dovey again. And somewhere between Genesis chapter 3 and Genesis chapter 4, something very amazing happened. Now I don't know about you, but if it was my wife and I, and we had an argument, something would have had to happen between Genesis 3 and Genesis 4. And that word is forgiveness. And I want you to see something very important, that in every marriage union, there's an important term, an important thing that happens in every marriage union called forgiveness. That a couple comes back together, and knowing how to forgive your wife and knowing how to forgive your husband is a very, very important part of marriage. Now, I want to explain to you some of the many reasons that people have conflict, okay? And I kind of categorized, thinking about this a little bit, I kind of categorized it into 3 different types of disagreements, 3 different types of conflicts, if you would. Let me just quickly share with you the first one. And maybe you can take this down. If you're taking this for a class, just start taking down things. Okay, number 1, listen to this. The first type of category of conflict is what I called the smallest stuff. Why do you have conflicts? The smallest stuff. And it's usually because of tiredness, exhaustion, and sometimes overpressure. Let me tell you a story, and let me see if you can identify, couples, let me see if you can identify with this. They found that 90% of conflicts happen in a home when 2 people are just very tired. Just had a long day, and it just happens to be the way it happens to be. A small thing can spark off a big argument. Okay? And see, we want to think about this. I have read a story here. It's told by a lady called Gigi Shidavan. Listen carefully. She's telling her story. It's a great story. A little long, wonderfully put together, but I'm going to read it for you, and I want you to listen to it very carefully. It kind of just, tells you everything I want to say here. He walked out, closing the door firmly behind him. I heard the car drive away, and with a heavy, aching heart, Gigi says, I leaned against the closed door. Hot, angry tears filled my eyes, spilled over, and ran down over my cheeks. How had it happened? How had things built up to this point? Neither of us had intended our little discussion to develop into a heated argument. But it was late, and we had both experienced a hard day. Stephen, who was a doctor, had risen early to drive for the carpool. Then he had seen several patients with difficult, heart-rending, heartbreaking problems. An emergency had taken up his lunch break, so he was already hungry and tired. As he had been behind schedule for the rest of the afternoon, when he finally left the office, he hit a traffic jam on the freeway and then arrived home tense and tired to a wife with 7 children, all demanding his attention. I too, Gigi says, had endured a difficult day. After a sleepless night with the baby, besides the normal responsibilities involved in running the home, rain had kept us confined indoors all day. It was humid. The children were more quarrelsome than usual, amusing themselves by picking on each other. That's common. Between settling arguments and soothing hurt feelings, I managed to get dinner on the table, but I hadn't had time to comb my hair or freshen up my makeup, and Stephen could see my frustration when he came in. Finally, when the dinner was over, the kitchen cleaned, the small children bathed and tucked into bed, and the teenagers all talked out, Stephen and I found ourselves alone in our bedroom trying to discuss a minor problem. It soon blew out of proportion. Angry feelings were vented, words spoken that we did not mean, and then a slammed door and a retreating car. I slumped into a chair, dissolving into tears of discouragement and disappointment in myself. How long was it going to take to learn my lesson? Late at night, especially after a wearisome day, is not the time for arguing, but for comfort, for encouragement, for loving. As I sat there, I remembered that I had been so busy trying to handle the home front, keeping everything and everyone under control, that I had not spent time with the Lord that day. I had even failed to pray for Stephen. No wonder things had not gone well. I glanced in the mirror and saw red, puffy eyes, no makeup, and hair in disarray. I saw lines of fatigue and tension where there should have been tenderness and love. And I understood Stephen's desire to get away and just cool off. I fell on my knees beside the chair, asking the Lord to forgive me and to fill me with His Holy Spirit, so I could be to Stephen all that he had ever dreamed. I asked for the Lord's strength. I asked for His sensitivity. I asked for His wisdom, so that I could juggle my own schedule and the demands of the home and the children, and still have time to meet my husband's needs when he came home from the day's work. Then I added a timid P.S. and asked God to give Stephen a change of heart too. I felt peace and a sudden refreshing from the Lord. I got up and washed my face, added a little color to my cheeks and lips, combed my hair, lavished perfume on myself, and climbed into bed to wait. Before long, I heard the front door open and familiar footsteps in the brick hallway. Our bedroom door opens quietly, and there he stood there. Stephen stood there, his tired face and his kind, loving eyes drawing me like a magnet. I flew into his arms. Later, our loving kisses and apologies erased the last traces of frustration and anger. Clinging to each other as we fell into a much-needed sleep, I couldn't help wondering why we hadn't thought of this in the first place. Can you identify? And I love this beautiful statement that she makes. Beautiful statement. How long was I going to take to learn the lesson that you don't discuss problems when everybody is tired? But the time in the evening is a time for loving, for encouragement, for comfort. And I would dare say that we need to consider that in the evenings, you know what, like we want to make our evenings, when comes home, when your wife returns home from work, maybe both working, we want to keep the evenings as family time. We want to keep the evenings to create a wonderful atmosphere for us as a family. That's an important thing to remember. And I would say a great application of this is husbands, when you come home, before you walk through the door, I would say you need to ask the Lord to give you joy and give you strength and give you peace and energy and strength and happiness for the people that are beyond that door there. Don't keep all the smiles for your colleagues in the office. They won't care too much about you when you leave that office one day. But remember that the ones who really love you, the ones you're going to build a lifelong relationship, are beyond that door. So don't come back grumpy. And don't use tiredness as an excuse for carnality. But you allow the Holy Spirit to quicken you. And as wives, if you're home earlier, get spruced up and just be ready to greet your husband at the door and keep things ready as much as you can so that you have a happy evening together. It's very simple. But so much, 90% of problems can be avoided if we just were a little sensitive to the fact that we've had a long day. And you can be tired, but you can be tired and still be loving. Amen? Right? Can you be tired and still loving? Yes, you can. You can be exhausted, but you can still be very loving. And that's the first reason, and I was thinking about that. It's a very simple solution. Sensitivity. Creating a wonderful atmosphere. That's a good reason. Here's a second reason why couples will have a disagreement. And I call it the middle stuff. The middle stuff. And number two, this is when we cross the line of respect or cross the line of honor for each other. Now imagine if I was in the office and I was late in the office. And my wife had made it very clear that evening, here we were going to have a very special evening with a special dinner, a family time, and she took all the trouble to cook. And I remember that. She called me, she SMS'd me, she gave me many reminders. But imagine if I was in the office and I never picked up the phone. She's saying, don't forget, we need you back at 7, 8 o'clock. We got a special dinner. Today is a special day with our son. And I never picked up the phone, and I never SMS'd back. And then I show up at 10 o'clock in the night, and they all had to eat. They didn't know where I was. The food is in the fridge. I come home, and I don't even talk to anyone much, or I say, well, I'm just busy. I would be very insensitive. And she would be very justified to be hurt with my insensitivity. Because in marriage, we have to have loving consideration for each other. I love watching from the office, so Atul and Deepa will call each other, and I will call my wife, and Kishore will call his wife. Why do we do that? Why does loving couples do that in a home? Because we want to communicate what's our next plan. We want to say, I'll be home late today. It's just a very simple part of being considerate for one another as a couple. Put yourself on the other side. What if Sue was out and we had an appointment at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and she was out with one of the girls in a cafe day sipping coffee. She hardly does that, by the way. And she knew we had an appointment at 2 and I was trying to call her. And she said, yeah, I'm coming. But then she came at 3 o'clock. We'd be crossing a line of honor for each other. It'd be very easy for us to express our disappointment because we had certain commitments to keep. So you must remember that your spouse in marriage, there's a line of honor and respect. It's a very simple thing. But marriage requires that kind of loving commitment, that loving consideration. And one of the things oftentimes that couples miss is they take each other for granted. It just leads to a fact of like, you don't respect me, you don't honor that I was waiting for you and I planned this whole thing for you. Or we blow it once in a while. But it should not be a norm. It should be something that we're thinking about often, about people we care about. Now, there's a third area where disagreements are confrontation, and this is the most serious one. It's a larger area. It's a larger, I would talk about it in areas where there is a need for confronting. But I like to use a different word than confronting. The word confronting is too strong. I love the word carefronting. Do you remember I shared that with you once? Carefronting. You care about somebody, so you speak to them in love. Now, let me explain how this works in a marriage. If you have larger issues. Let's say your husband, God forbid, had started to get into getting on the net and getting into sites that were terribly bad. Pornography. God forbid that happened. Now, that would not be a very healthy thing at all for him. That would never be good for your marriage. And I'm going to speak about that in one of the messages soon. What chemical attractions happen and how people get addicted to internet sites and pornography, and how devastating it is for a wife to find that out. It just ruins her, as if she's not good enough for you. And don't you ever get into that thing. But imagine if the wife found out that was happening. Well, she couldn't be silent about it. She would have to speak to her husband and speak the truth in love. What if he came home drunk every night and created a problem? She would have to speak the truth in love. I had a person that I know very well, and he got married. He got married through internet website. And he married a girl that he met on the website. He knew the girl for 3 months. She had been married and divorced. She had 3 kids. He was a little guy. She was a very big-made girl. That's not the problem. The problem is he didn't even get to know her. After they got married, they had their own children, and she found out that this girl, God bless her, she came from a Christian home, but her parents broke up, and she had great needs in her life. And one of the ways that she had recreation was spending money. She was not a little spender. She would go to her electronics store, she would go to her furniture mall, and even if she didn't need anything, she would just buy things. 4 kids. Within the 6 months of their marriage, she rang up a bill of $40,000 to her. And she didn't think anything about it. She just thought, if you love me, I'm just buying it for our home. $40,000. At first he thought it was just a mistake. Then he realized that she had a problem. She was a compulsive buyer. She just had to buy. Eventually they ended up having to go for counseling. But you see, there's an issue here that is severe. It is a problem. We have a financial problem that's causing unbelievable stress in our home. The interest rates on the credit that was taken on the credit card was unbelievable. And he's spending all his time working to pay off the debt now. A problem. Now, I want to consider something. When you get married, you are committed also to the growth of your husband and your wife. That's what marriage does. 2 friends getting together, and you know what? Because you're friends, you can't leave each other in problems like that. And so good marriages will try to move in such a way that we're going to try and see how these areas can change. And when you have to cause somebody to change in an area, there's going to be a conflict, there's going to be a problem, there's going to be a disagreement. But those are good disagreements. Because in every conflict, there are times when there are weak points in somebody's life which need to be changed. Now, please be careful. I want to say something. You cannot change your husband. We are teaching that in the counseling class. You cannot, the wife cannot change the husband, and the husband cannot change the wife. What you can do is you can inspire them and influence them by your love, by your kindness, by your words, by coming alongside to help them, recognizing that you are part of the solution with them, and you'll work it through with them if they're willing to change. So many times, husbands and wives can influence each other over a period of time. So if you're in a situation which is very difficult, don't give up. Don't throw up your hands and say, oh, I don't think anything's going to happen in this marriage. Our marriage is over. No, you married somebody. Maybe they have some problems in their lives, some blind spots. Maybe God will use you to change them, and maybe they will have a great marriage, and they will be happy that they changed. But here comes the communication thing. And I love this verse, and we're going to go now to a verse in the Bible, and it's one of the best verses you can ever think of biblical wisdom. Okay, let's turn to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 25. We'll read from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25 to 32. And I want you to just really put this down as the verse, the key verse for learning communication, not just in communicating with your husband in disagreement, but also in communicating with anybody, any relationship. It's a great verse. Paul is writing this verse. If you turn to chapter 1, you'll come to Ephesians chapter 5, where Paul is talking about this amazing principle of love, the marriage bond and love. He says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, Ephesians 5:25. And wives, submit to your husbands as unto the Lord. You know, the husband's the head of the wife. And he goes on to this whole beautiful thing that we should love each other because we're members of one another's body, right? So we're going to help each other. But before he comes to Ephesians chapter 5, watch how Paul is addressing an important part of communication in Ephesians chapter 4. Great relationships. Watch this. Now, we're going to just go from a few verses before we come to practical stuff. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Listen. Therefore, laying aside falsehood, or in one translation says, if there be any falsehood, let us speak the truth to one another. Let's use the word instead of neighbor. Speak the truth to your mate. If there is any falsehood, let us speak the truth to your mate. Let's say that together. Let us what? Speak the truth to your mate. Ephesians verse 4:15 says, speak the truth in love. Why? Because we are members of one another. That's the first principle. That you don't sweep things under the carpet. You don't get bitter and just get all worked up about it and don't confront. There's a time when you need to speak the truth to your mate. Where there are major issues, all minor issues, you need to speak the truth to them in love. Okay? That's the first principle. Number 2, listen to this one. The next verse says, be angry, but do not sin. What does that mean? Be angry, but do not sin. Well, if your husband or your wife, if your husband's into some looking and watching some stuff that he shouldn't be watching, if your husband's into verbally abusing your kids and calling them all kinds of names all the time, if your husband is into, or your wife is into financial, spending or unkind with the words, guess what? You're going to be hurt. You're going to be disappointed. In fact, you might be very angry. Anger is an emotion given by God. And by the way, anger is not always sinful. That's why he says, be angry, yet do not sin. Now let me just tell you something. Jesus was angry. There was twice in the scriptures where Jesus actually was so upset because the Jewish leaders had taken the temple, a sacred place of prayer, and made it a place for money changers. And he was so upset in the court of the Gentiles because he said, the Gentiles they're not important. As long as the Jewish house is okay, the Gentiles are not important. Jesus was, no, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, for all Gentile peoples. It's for the whole world. My house is a house of prayer. Don't you ever say that. And Jesus was upset with the money changers. And he took a whip, and he made a call, and he just overturned the changers, and he said, out, out, out. And he told them why he were out. He was upset. But that was a righteous anger, zeal for God's house had consumed him. It was a righteous anger. For example, if you saw a child being molested on the street, somebody was out there, and you were angry, that would be a righteous anger. God gave you emotions of anger. Sometimes to say, what my husband's doing is not right. That's not right. It'll hurt our children. Or it'll hurt his own life. That's not right. You're angry about it. To have anger is not a problem, but to have anger in the right way is important. If I lose my temper, if I lose control of myself, then anger can become sinful. And how often we miss that. How often we miss that. We're angry, but we allow our tempers to get the better of us. Somebody says, I just get a quick temper. I just get angry. I'm like a shotgun. I fire and bullets go all over, but then I'm over. But look at the damage you do. It's not wrong to, you have a temper. Everybody has a temper. We all get upset. But to be able to control that temper. Are you following me? Proverbs chapter 14 verse 17 says, a short-tempered man is foolish, but a man who is wise and has understanding is slow to anger. In other words, he does get angry. You're not a mannequin. But you're very slow to anger. Be quick to listen, be slow to speak, be slow to anger. James 1:19. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. So understanding that, to be angry for the right reason, to be angry with the right motivation, to be angry with the right emotion, intensity, to be angry for the right amount of time, that's good anger. But when it crosses over to you losing your temper, exploding, keeping that anger for days and days and days and letting it enter and fester inside of you and move into bitterness, you just crossed into sinful anger. So the Bible says, be angry. Are you following this? Yet do not sin. And then the Bible tells us why we should not be angry all the time. Because you don't want to give the devil an opportunity, says the next verse, verse 26b. And then the next few verses, 31 says, let all bitterness, because the devil will turn your anger into bitterness and wrath and fester the anger so that you don't have a relationship with your spouse anymore. Are you following that? But instead be kind, be tender-hearted, verse 32. Tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ has forgiven you. The third principle in communication, we go further down. Verse 29. Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, so that it will minister grace to your spouse. In other words, be careful about the kinds of words you use. When you become a believer, you try now no longer, I'm not going to use corrupt words. I'm going to use, even when I'm communicating with my spouse, Lord, teach me. Oh, we fail, but Lord, teach me to use positive words. Let me use loving words. Let me use words that don't take away from respect, don't take away from love. At the end of your communication, your wife and husband must get the point of what's the issue, but they must also know that you love them very much. Isn't this great principles? Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25 to 32. God gives us the strategy in which to process communication. It's awesome. Now I want to go through some very practical points here in disagreement. Number one, okay, there's a few things you don't do when you're having a conflict. Number one, you don't win the argument by yelling. You don't win the argument by yelling. Now listen carefully. You're in an argument. Can you try to process, and we speak to ourselves, can you process Ephesians 4:25 to 32? Can you say, oh, I just got hurt by my spouse. But let me see here. Be angry but sin not. Just thinking that out. Be angry but sin not. I need to speak the truth, but let me do it in love. And if you take a few minutes to cool down and just kind of plan what you're going to say instead of just going after your spouse and saying, I got to tell you exactly how I feel right now, invariably that's going to cause a problem. But if you say to your spouse, you plan what you're going to say, you really go into the issues that need to be communicated, and you plan how you're going to say it, you know what? God can come up with something very amazing, give you very creative thoughts to say to your spouse. Are you following what I'm saying? So the first principle is, don't win the argument by shouting. Okay? Cool down. I heard a story of a man who was 78 years old, and he went to see his doctor, and the doctor said, my, you're amazing for 78 years old. You are so healthy, so fit. You've got the body of a 60-year-old. What's the secret? And he says, well, doctor, actually, you want to really know, I made a pact with my wife when we were getting married. And this is what we said. She said if she was going to lose her temper, she was going to get angry, then she would stay in the kitchen to cool off before she spoke. And if I was going to get angry and lose my temper, then I would go outside and take a walk. Well, for 50 years, I've been doing a lot of walking. A wise man, he was still 78 years, 50 years old, married. So the first thing is you don't win the argument by yelling. Number two, this is important. Don't share, don't air your public, your dirty linen before the public. You want to really hurt your marriage? Go tell it to your best friend. Go talk about it in the office. Go speak to people and see how that'll be with your wife. Don't be foolish. If you need to go to anybody, if you're having trouble, you go to a counselor or you go to a pastor. But unless there's permission from your family, you don't even go to your parents until both of you agree that they're the best ones to handle it. You don't need to talk to everybody. Somebody said before they got married, he talked and she listened. Then the honeymoon came, and now she talked and he listened. And then they got married, and they both talked and the neighbors listened. About 6-8 months ago, we had honestly, it was so sad. There were some neighbors of ours in the next building, and they were just fighting and fighting and fighting. It was 10 o'clock in the night. And I don't think they understood. It just, something small must have happened. And they went on for 1.5 hours. And it was so quiet in the night. Everybody at the neighbors were at the windows. It was so sad. And at the end of it, we were like so grieved, my wife and I. We got on our knees and we began to pray for them. Because I thought, how could they ever live here? You are a Christian. You will have disagreements. But you better make sure that if you have a testimony in your neighborhood, you better be careful how you have a disagreement. When you need to have a disagreement, how about closing the door, putting the children outside, and talking between yourselves in the bedroom? Children don't need to see their moms and dads fighting all the time. Number 4, deal with the issue and don't attack the person. This is a hard one to do, right? Deal with the issues and don't attack the person. For example, don't attack your spouse's self-worth. It can happen so often. You know, you say to her, oh, you know, or she says to you, you know, you're always like that. You're always doing it that way. That is you're the most stupid person in the world. You did this and you did that. And you know what? It can happen so often. In the end, you didn't mean it. But those words are there. And we need to get over that. And so don't attack the person. Instead, address the issue. Say, you know, I was very disappointed that you didn't come home and you didn't bother to call me, and I was waiting for you. That's addressing an issue. Oh, I was very embarrassed when you said in front of everybody a very sarcastic, very unkind, very harsh words. I was very hurt with that. Now, what are you communicating? You're communicating your deepest needs. You're getting across what really caused the hurt without attacking the person. But don't go on and attack the person and bring up the past and try to do that. The second thing that's important, don't bring up her parents or his parents. Why bring the in-laws in? You know, you're becoming more and more like your mother. That's dishonoring. If you're going to fight, fight fair. Don't hit under the belly. You understand what I'm talking about? Don't do that. That's not worth it. Why bring in somebody? I heard a story of a couple that they had an argument and they were driving down the country road, and they came across, as they were driving down the farm, they came across a whole pack of mules and pigs, and they weren't speaking for the whole journey. But the husband decided to poke fun at his wife, and she said, he turned to his wife and said, "Look at those mules. I wonder, no relatives of yours, are they?" And she turned to him and said, "Yes, in-laws." Don't have the kids involved. Number 6 or 7, I don't know which number it is. Don't use sex as a weapon. People often will say, well, we're not going to have any physical intimacy until we get our marriage right. Now, I understand if you've had an argument, you're not going to have all these close feelings for each other at that moment. But to use that as a weapon in your marriage is the most dangerous thing a wife or a husband can ever do. Because Paul says very clearly, and listen to this admonition from the Bible, from the Apostle Paul. He says, a wife's body is not her own, a husband's body is not her own. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1 to 5. Therefore, stop depriving one another, except by mutual agreement, that you might be praying and fasting, lest the devil tempt you. And if you use physical intimacy and sexual intimacy as a reward or a punishment for your spouse, then they're going to get very frustrated. And many, many husbands, somebody said once, he said, if you use sex as a weapon, you enter into an arms race. And the husband's going to say, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'll find love in somebody else's arms. Now that's wrong, and it's terrible. But I dare say, you didn't realize that they had a need in their life. And you're using what God gave you as a weapon. The do's and don'ts of marriage. Let's think of some things. If you were in a conflict, let's say, now you're already in, you're already going to be talking. You have an issue now that you have to discuss with your husband. Let's think of some ways you'd approach it. Number one, let's think of some ways you'd approach it. We're getting ready to close. Number one, before you approach your spouse or your mate on the topic that's a real bother to you, whatever you want to discuss with them, here's a couple of things that I really like. By the way, P.Karl wrote an excellent paper in one of my classes, and you really touched on these points, and I'm actually taking 3 points from her because it was so good. P.Karl, where are you? Awesome, good job, wow. Okay, let's think of them, and I'll tell you at the end of the class which ones were good, or which ones that she spoke about. But the first one, it's important, I think. Before you speak to your partner, talk and listen to God. You want to write that down? Before you speak to your partner, why don't you talk and listen to God. And as you go to God, analyze what is the real concern, an issue in prayer by seeking God. Many times you can go to God, we go to God and say, God, please change my children, or please change my wife. And you pray this prayer, please do that. And then after some time you're listening, and God says, I will do that, but first I want to change you. And so often when you're in a conflict and you have a big issue you want to discuss with your family, you know what? If you go to God and you process it through the mind of God, you find out that God is something that you have to do also to understand where your spouse is coming from. So talk to God first. And you know what? God will give you a creative way and a loving way to approach your spouse. Does that make sense? Okay, number one. Number two, and this was P.Karl's comment, ask your spouse for a time where he or she would be ready for a discussion about an area of concern, a good time to talk. I think that's important. Plan a convenient time to talk. Don't just kind of go in and then late in the night like that woman did, Gigi did, right? She found out that was not the good time to talk. It was not the correct time to talk. Find a good time and have a great discussion, because we're going to have something meaningful come out of this conversation. Number three, be precise in communicating the issues. This is also P.Karl's point, by the way. I think she should be a marriage counselor. Be precise and concise in communicating the issue. Listen to this one. Avoid dragging in situations and mistakes that happened in the past. Be precise. Talk about what the issue is. Be careful about not having emotional outbursts, facial expressions that convey hate. You're just going to communicate what the issue is. Yeah, without all the emotional outbursts. Number four, this is a good one. This was advice given to me when we were getting married 19 years ago. Listen to this one. Talk to your mate and allow your mate to talk to you. Very simple. We were 19 years ago, when we were getting married, my wife and I were in a certain place, and we spoke to a senior pastor who's now gone home to be with the Lord. It wasn't Dr. Stevens, just another man we really loved and admired. And he said these words to us as we went for premarital preparation and counseling. And he said these great words to us over dinner. He says, when you're angry, talk to your mate. He said, learn to talk in turns. This is what he said, learn to talk in turns. And then he began to explain what that meant, and I never forgot that advice. At that time, 19 years ago, I never thought I would ever get angry with my wife. And she never thought we would get angry with each other. We just never thought that would happen. But over the years, we had to talk in turns many times. Very important. Now listen carefully. Talk in turns. What does that mean? It means that if you've got an issue that is really important to you, that you need to communicate at the right time, sit your spouse down, and this is what you do. You make a commitment. We call it the 3 to 5 minute rule. In other words, I will share with you what I feel, my ideas about this issue for 3 to 5 minutes. And during those 3 to 5 minutes, you can't speak. In other words, no butting in, just listen to my heart. Listen to my heart. I want to communicate everything. And after the 5 minutes is over, now it's your turn to speak. And I follow the same thing. I will listen to your heart about how you feel about that issue. And we go back and forth and back and forth. And if you were upset and you were angry, and if you follow this simple rule, guess what's going to happen? You know what's going to happen? You're going to start to understand what your mate really feels about an issue. And oftentimes with that situation, we come up with an idea. I get some thoughts that I never thought about before. It's important to understand that. Now, there's one important thing he said in this rule. He said, when your spouse is talking, you should be listening, not reloading your gun to figure out what's your next argument. Are you following what I'm saying? Some of the single people don't know what I'm saying. This is going way over their heads right now, and that's okay. But listen, you're not trying to reload your gun and try to figure out what I'm going to say next. No, the issue is to get to understand the feelings and how your spouse really feels about an issue. You're going to get to know her heart. And she's going to get to know your heart. And you go back and forth and back and forth. And you know what's going to happen? Sometimes you walk away from the situation and you just haven't had a solution yet. But it's okay. You say, let's discuss this later. I want to talk about this later. It's an important issue. But somehow in the time that you'll have gone away from the situation, God speaks to you. God speaks to you. And oftentimes a great solution has come out of that. God's solution, which is what we wanted in the first place. So, talk to your mate. Very simple, but take turns talking. And that's important. One final, last one, which comes to the 6th commandment that we're talking about today, I believe, or 5th commandment. And this is, do not let the sun go down on your anger. That's an excellent, what an awesome thing. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. That's beautiful. One version says, do not let your anger fester. And giving an area for the devil. The word, do not make room for the devil, Ephesians 4:26, is actually the word, do not mark off an area. The Greek word topos, where we get the word topography or map. Do not give an area in your soul where the devil can come in. Do not give an area in your soul. Now, for example, if I've got bitterness to my wife and we've not resolved an issue and we go to sleep that way, the next morning we have it talking, you know what's going to happen? Little things she does now is going to irritate me. Or little things I do and so on. And we start, instead of moving towards forgiveness, we start moving towards what? Bitterness. Now we start getting more and more bitter. I heard a story, listen carefully, I heard a story. Oh, Pastor Schaller shared this story many years ago, and I just laughed so much about it. About a couple, listen to this, a couple, they had a fight, the middle-aged couple, they had a fight over an empty pickle bottle cover that was left unopened, was left open. And the wife always wanted the cover to be closed, and the husband always left it open. And so after 15 times of 20, 30, 40 times of telling him, she just one day lost it. And he was so upset that a little thing like that upset her. And they didn't talk. They didn't talk. They didn't talk for one day. The next day they didn't talk. 5 days, 1 week. After 1 week, the issue had festered so much. They were now having other issues. But they forgot the original issue was the pickle bottle cover. Do you know how long they didn't talk for? 22 years. 22 years. They lived together in the same home, but the issue had started with a pickle bottle cover. Funny story, and yet it's true. Why? Because if you let anger fester, the devil says, aha, wonderful. Now I'm going to turn it into bitterness. And then bitterness into malice and slander. You can read all the things that are in there. And bitterness becomes an acid in your soul. When you start having blood pressure and diabetes and ulcers and stress, and you can't look at your husband, and if you have bitterness in your heart, you have no relationship with God, and all those things happen in your marriage. And wow, it's a terrible thing. And so Jesus said, listen, in your marriage, if you're going to have one important commandment, it's forgive, forgive, forgive 490 times and more. Forgive 70 times 7 more. Just unlimited forgiveness. This is your marriage. It's awesome. It's amazing. And you don't need to have an issue that we will use these words in our marriage when we hurt each other. We will not go to bed like with the, like with the sun going down without making up. And if we do it that night, then the next day we're not going to let this go on too long. We're not going to let this go on too long because we love each other too much. And little things are not going to. And I believe that marriage is paved on a road of unbelievable forgiveness, where we learn to say, I love you and I'm sorry. Learn these words in your marriage is what I'd say to young people and to older people, every one of us. Learn these words and say them often in your marriage. Often use them. These are the words, I love you. I love you. You're precious to me. if you build your marriage on a lot of praise, a lot of appreciation, a lot of great words, kind words, edifying words, caring actions throughout, then when you have a disagreement, it's going to be okay, because you know what? You've built a great relationship, and this little disagreement is just a small part of it. In fact, the reason you got so hurt in your marriage is because you were so close. Because you're close. I always give the illustration, if somebody hurt me when I was traveling, I was jumping on a train to Churchgate, and somebody came and pushed me and was rough with me when I got in the train, and there on top of it, he abused me, and the train was moving out, and I couldn't do anything about it. I shouldn't be doing anything about it. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't be doing. But if I couldn't do anything about it, I would be upset maybe for 1 minute or two. But then I would just forget it. I'd say, I don't even know the guy. He's an acquaintance. But in marriage, when someone very close hurts us, someone we love hurts us, somebody that we've pledged our life to hurts us, we get more upset. Why do you think civil wars are worse than any other wars? Why do you think marriage problems and marriage disputes, brother against brother and sister and husband, wife, is the worst kind? Why? Because we are supposed to be close. And so when somebody hurts us, we really get hurt. But actually, it's a symbol of your great love for that person. A counselor was listening to a woman pouring out her problems with her husband, but all the time she kept on referring to him as hon, hon, hon. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think, hon? Yes, you did that, didn't you, hon? So the counselor says, that's really crazy. What are you're fighting with him all the time, and you keep calling him hon. She said, yes, I call him Attila the Hun. But think about this. We can't go on like that. Forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness is so beautiful. Pastor Schaller told a story that I thought was so transparent and so sweet, and I'm going to share it with you. But if you say, I love you, forgive me, these are the words you should learn. I love you. I'm sorry I hurt you. Forgive me. I was wrong. You know what causes us not to say those words? Only one thing, pride. But if you say those words, it's amazing what we'll do in your marriage. You just get wrong again. Because marriage is all about making mistakes. It's about two people very imperfect, but then are drawn together in an amazing bond. And sometimes when you say that to your spouse, there are two kinds of responses. Please understand it. Yeah, listen to this. Two kinds of responses. One, your spouse is like a gas stove. You say, I'm sorry, and it's like, okay, done. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, forgive me. You really are? Okay, done, over. That's it. Or your spouse could be like an electric oven. They say, yes, I'm sorry, forgive me, and they put the thing off. But it takes a little while to cool. You may be like that too. But forgive you must. But forgive you must. Pastor Schaller told a funny story once, and I just thought it was so sweet because he's so awesome and he's so amazing as a man of God. But one day he and Lisa, where he was sharing with us a story, he and Lisa had a disagreement in the house, and he went to bed. He was really upset with her, and he says, I'm a pastor, I teach the Bible, I minister, and he says, I was there we were on the same bed, and I turned myself on the other side, and I was facing the wall, and she was on the other side, and we knew that we were just so stupid. We made a small thing, we were upset, we were going to be fine the next morning. He says, but Lisa was not the one to go to bed without making up. And so she kicked me from under the bedsheet. And he turned to her, he looked at her, and they started laughing. He says, I felt like a little kid. Here I was, turned around and looking at the wall, and I don't want to make up, I don't want to say it. But it happens. But what a beautiful thing when there is forgiveness. I'll close with one last story that is so beautiful. A grandmother was asked. They were celebrating their 50th anniversary. A grandmother was asked. And all the grandparents, grandchildren, grandparents came together. It was 50th anniversary. And they were asking Grandma, and Grandpa was there. They said, what is the secret? What is the secret of your 50 years of marriage? And Grandma said, tell us. And then the grandma said, well, you want to know the secret? She says, when I was going to marry Bill, I made it a point before we got married that there were 10 things about him I did not like. But 10 things about his personality I did not like. But I would never bring it up after we were married. 10 things. She says, when we went to the marriage altar, I vowed to God that I would bring up these 10 things in the marriage. She says, that was the secret. So one of the grandchildren turned to her and says, Grandma, what were those 10 things? Tell me, what were those 10 things? And the grandmother turned to her and said, you know what? I honestly don't remember. I didn't write them down. But whenever Bill got me really hopping mad, I would say, lucky for him, it's one of those 10 things. I thought that was cute. She had a tender heart. And that's why she could go 50 years and have a great golden marriage. And that's the way we are with our own spouses. Forgiveness, intimacy, and helping each other to grow. We have to help each other grow. That's what that communication is all about. Would you pray? Bow your heads, please.